In the early 370s, the power balance was disrupted by the arrival of the Huns on the eastern fringes of the Gothic territories. This nomadic people from the steppes of Central Asia initially conquered the Alans, another nomadic group residing to the east of the Don River. According to Ammianus Marcellinus, the remaining Alans migrated westward into the prosperous realm of the Gruthangi, a Gothic clan led by Ermenrich, situated north of the Black Sea between the Dniester and Dnieper rivers. Following a brief resistance, Ermenrich took his own life, possibly as an offering to the gods for the protection of his people. Withamir, Ermenrich's successor, enlisted the help of some Huns to fend off the Alans, but according to Ammianus, after many defeats, he was overcome by a superior force and perished in battle. The Gruthangi withdrew westward across the Dniester into the territory of the Thervingi, a Gothic clan inhabiting the land between the Danube and Dniester. They constructed defensive works, while Athanaric, the leader of the Thervingi, advanced eastwards and positioned his forces along the banks of the Dniester, some distance away from the Gruthangi's fortifications. The Huns, rather than the Alans, launched the next attack, targeting the Thervingi. Their highly mobile light cavalry eluded Athanaric's scouts, crossed the river by moonlight, and launched a surprise assault on the Goths. After being defeated, Athanaric sought refuge in the rugged mountainous terrain of modern Romania and began constructing new defensive works to safeguard his people from the Huns and Alans. The swift victories of the nomads over both Gothic clans spread terror along the frontier. Ammianus describes the Huns as abnormally savage and as a wild race, moving without encumbrances and consumed by a savage passion to pillage the property of others. Undoubtedly, their brutal reputation grew with every triumph, and by 376, rumors spread among all the German tribes that an unknown race of men had emerged from a remote corner of the earth, uprooting and destroying everything in their path like a whirlwind descending from high mountains. By 376, the situation for the Goths was not good. They had been forced out of their homes and were living in mountain hideouts or behind forts, struggling to find enough to survive. Athanaric, the Gothic leader, had been unable to protect his people from the Huns, which caused many of the Thervingi to abandon him. Led by Alavivus and Fritigern, a group of Goths sought refuge in the Roman Empire. At that time, the empire was ruled by two men. Flavius Valens had been in charge of the East since 364, while his young nephew Flavius Gratianus became the Western Emperor in 375 after his father Valentinian passed away. When Alavivus and Fritigern asked for protection, Valens was fighting against the powerful Persian Empire. The empire could probably use new soldiers, and with Valens' army busy elsewhere, it would have been hard for him to refuse the Goths. So, their request was accepted, even though many Romans weren't happy about it. But there was a condition. In exchange for land and support, the Goths had to agree to join the Roman army. Later, some Roman leaders, Lupicinus and Maximus, made more demands. The Goths had to give up their children as slaves and surrender all their weapons. Relations between the Goths and their Roman hosts quickly worsened. After being kept near the Danube crossing for a long time, the Goths broke out of their containment area and headed south towards Marcianople in an attempt to settle there. It seems that the Romans did not authorize this move, but they did not try to stop the Goths, probably because their forces were stretched too thin. Lupicinus attempted to regain control over the Goths by arranging a dinner party to assassinate their leaders. He tricked Alavivus and Fritigern into believing that they would discuss provisions for their people at the party. Lupicinus only allowed the leaders and their immediate bodyguards to enter the town, then kept the bodyguards outside his headquarters while the leaders dined. He ordered troops to kill the Gothic bodyguards, but things did not go as planned, and fighting broke out. It is unclear whether Lupicinus intended to keep the leaders hostage or kill them, but Alavivus apparently died while Fritigern escaped. Jordanes claims that Fritigern fought his way out, while Ammianus says he convinced Lupicinus that he would try to pacify his followers to avoid battle. However, he managed it, Fritigern rejoined his people, and they started looting and burning the farms and villas around the town. Lupicinus quickly gathered troops and marched out of the city to confront the Goths. The forces clashed 9 miles from the city, most likely to the west. It is challenging to determine the exact number of troops Lupicinus could have mustered. Thrace, being a large province and one of the 12 dioceses of the divided empire, likely housed around 20,000 mobile troops stationed in its towns, along with an equal number of frontier guards, dispersed along the lower Danube. However, due to the critical role of the frontier guards in maintaining the empire's security, they were not factored into Lupicinus' plans. The mobile troops, although documented on paper, may not have all been present in reality, as their regiments were spread across numerous towns, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. Lupicinus, acting swiftly to quell the escalating problem and prevent unfavorable reports from reaching the emperor, likely only managed to gather the regiments stationed in Marcianople and the remaining frontier units that had accompanied the barbarian convoy. Considering these factors, it is probable that Lupicinus commanded no more than 5,000 or 6,000 men. However, these were professional soldiers equipped with the state's mass-produced heavy gear. During that era, the Roman army shifted away from traditional weaponry such as the pilum and the gladius, favoring the spear, which could be as long as 2.5 meters, and the long sword, spatha. The soldiers also used a round or oval wooden shield and an iron coat of mail instead of the previous lorica or cuirass. Additionally, soldiers carried small javelins and lead-weighted darts for combat at a distance, while archers played a significant role. Although the appearance of the steel helmet remained reminiscent of the old legionaries, the professionalism and discipline of the regular army persisted. It is difficult to estimate the exact number of men under Fritigern's command when facing Lupicinus's force, but it is likely that the Goths outnumbered the Romans. Fritigern could have mustered around 7,000 to 8,000 fighters, possibly more if he had already been joined by the undocumented refugees who had crossed the Danube after the Romans relaxed their surveillance. Although the total number of refugees was much higher, consisting of tens of thousands of people, most of them were non-combatants, women, elderly, the sick, and children in particular. When the Goths reached the Roman side of the river, they were poorly equipped, much like other barbarian tribes, being economically disadvantaged. Most of their warriors carried only a lance and a wooden shield, with helmets and swords being reserved for the leaders as precious possessions. Some Goths had armed themselves by looting the Romans killed in the clashes outside the walls of Marcianople, but they were likely few in number. All in all, Lupicinus had a good chance of success. The forces that clashed outside Marcianople likely consisted of approximately 5,000 to 8,000 fighting men on each side, according to the Notitia Dignitatum. If this source is accurate, Lupicinus would have had no more than about 1,000 cavalry, and the Goths probably had a similar or smaller number. Although Ammianus mentions Fritigern escaping from Marcianople on horseback, very few others would have had horses at that point in the campaign. The Goths were also driven by desperation. While there is no indication of the morale of the Romans, it can be assumed that they were as confident as well-trained troops facing what they perceived as an undisciplined mob. As dawn broke, the rising sun cast long shadows across the battlefield where the Roman and Gothic armies came into view of one another. The air was thick with the tension of impending conflict, and the soldiers tightened their grips on their swords and shields, their breaths coming in measured, steady rhythms. The banners of Rome fluttered in the breeze, a symbol of their unyielding strength and discipline. Across the field, the Goths gathered, a sea of warriors with faces hardened by a lifetime of struggle and survival. Their wooden shields bore the marks of countless battles, and the iron or bronze bosses at their centers gleamed menacingly, each a deadly promise of the violence to come. The Goths' numbers seemed endless, a daunting wave ready to crash against the Roman lines, and the ground trembled under the weight of thousands of marching feet. As the armies came into view of each other, the Romans deployed defensively, their formation a testament to centuries of military tradition. The legions, known for their disciplined infantry tactics, prepared to receive the charge. By the 4th century, cavalry had become the main offensive arm of the Roman forces. But that day, Romans faced a ferocious enemy on foot. With a guttural roar, the barbarians hurled themselves recklessly at the Roman lines. Their shields slammed into the bodies of their opponents with bone-crunching force, and spears and swords flashed in the morning light, seeking Roman flesh. The Goths attacked with relentless fury, their wooden shields smashing into the enemy, the sharp points of their weapons stabbing through the gaps in the Roman defense. Through the spaces between the shields, they thrust their lances and swords, each strike a desperate bid for victory. The Roman soldiers fought valiantly, their lines holding firm against the initial onslaught. But the sheer number of Goths proved overwhelming. Tribunes barked orders, trying to maintain formation, but the relentless pressure of the Gothic attack began to tell. Slowly, inexorably, the Roman lines started to buckle under the weight of the assault. Amidst the chaos, the clash of steel against steel, the cries of the wounded, and the shouts of commanders trying to rally their men, echoed through the battlefield. The Roman standards, a symbol of their enduring might, were snatched away by the enemy. The sight of their sacred banners falling to the Goths sent a shudder through the Roman ranks. Desperation set in as the legionaries fought on, their spirits wavering. In the heart of the battle, Roman soldiers fell in droves, their armor offering little protection against the furious Gothic onslaught. The Romans were being slaughtered, their discipline and training no match for the Goths' savage onslaught. Blood stained the earth, and the cries of the dying filled the air. The tribunes, valiant leaders in their own right, were cut down one by one, their bodies trampled underfoot as the Goths pressed their advantage. As the day wore on, the realization dawned that the battle was lost. The legionaries' lines could no longer hold, and a great part of the force gathered by Lupicinus lay dead or dying on the battlefield. Their luckless commander, driven by a singular, desperate aim, spurred his horse into a gallop, fleeing the carnage, his heart pounding with fear and shame. By nightfall, the battlefield was silent save for the moans of the wounded and the grim task of the victors. The Goths moved among the fallen, stripping the dead of their gear. Helms, sword, and coats of mail were taken as trophies and to arm their own. If it was true that a great part of Lupicinus's force had fallen, then there was indeed a bounty of equipment to be claimed by the triumphant Goths. The Roman defeat was complete, their mighty legions shattered, their standards lost, and their commander fled. The battlefield, once a testament to Roman strength, was now a graveyard of broken bodies and shattered dreams. The Goths, bloodied but victorious, stood as a testament to the brutal reality of war, where numbers and ferocity could overcome even the most disciplined of armies. This brief but fierce encounter brings out a number of key points. Firstly, the Goths, like other Germanic armies, relied on a powerful charge in attack formations in their battles, aiming to quickly overpower their opponents. This tactic proved successful at Marcianople, allowing them to dominate the battlefield unless their foes had a substantial second line of defense. Additionally, the Goths utilized their shields offensively, using the central bar, often covered by an iron or bronze boss, to deliver powerful strikes. Lastly, if Ammianus' account of the battle's outcome is accurate, and most of the Romans were indeed killed, there would have been ample weapons and armor for all the Thervingi warriors to be fully equipped. We cannot be certain whether Fritigern paused to contemplate the situation. As we will come to understand later, he was not an ordinary barbarian from an intellectual standpoint and was adept at strategic thinking. Therefore, it is likely that he engaged in deep reflection after the initial euphoria of victory abated. Two things appeared evident. First, the Goths, after such a slaughter, had irreversibly committed themselves against the Romans, with no possibility of turning back. Second, they now held dominion over Thrace, or at least the open rural areas within it. None of the Roman garrisons confined to the major cities were sufficiently robust to confront the Goths, and until the emperor in Antioch made a decision, no one could hinder their movements or prevent them from ravaging the land with fire and sword. Although the Goths emerged victorious in the first battle, the war was far from concluded, and both sides would clash again at the Battle of Ad Salices.